Hi there. Come on in. Come one, come all. It's time again for my wrestling show. Now, I would like to address a few questions people had from last week to start off the show. One of the comments posted on the last one was from Jardine Patton. Or Patton, whatever the fuck his name is. Who the fuck cares? He's got long hair, he's a fucking hippie. Get a haircut. Didn't get a job. Well, Jardine said, how the hell is Ric Flair the worst wrestler? How the fuck could you even think that? Jardine, I pretty much explained how the fuck I could think that in the last video, didn't I? Maybe if you took Ric Flair's 60-year-old gray-haired cock out of your ear, you could have heard me explain it. Or if you quit sucking his dick long enough, you could go on the internet and see my reasons why. So Jardine, go back to sucking Flair's cock and get the fuck off my channel. If I wanted to hear your opinion, I'd beat it out of you. Now the next question comes from the Dub Doubter. He says I'm going with Disco Inferno as the worst wrestler. Well, Dub, I'm not angry about this. I can understand why. Disco Inferno had a horrible gimmick. I mean, absolutely horrible. It was incredibly stupid. And I don't know why they did it. But if you watch his matches, he's really not a bad wrestler. He can sell moves well. He can do them realistically. He's got good charisma. He's very showman. He's not a bad wrestler. Especially at the place he was on the card, which was typically an opening eventer. I mean, he had a horrible gimmick, yeah, but he wasn't actually bad in the ring. So that's why I didn't go with him. Well, he did have a horrible gimmick, and at the end of his run, he did get really bad and out of shape. In his prime, he was actually pretty good in the ring. So that's why I didn't pick Disco Inferno. If you disagree, you can disagree. Except for you, Jardine. You shut the fuck up and get the hell off my channel. Now, what are we talking about today? Since I covered who was the worst wrestler, should I cover who's the greatest wrestler in this video? No, I don't feel like doing that. Should I cover upcoming WrestleMania feuds? No, I don't want to do that either. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, since according to WWE.com, and of course they're the authority on everything apparently, March is Women's Month. Who knew? And because March is Women's Month, they have something up talking about women past, present, future, divas in the WWE, and so on and so forth. I didn't look on it. I didn't read it completely because it required me to turn my pop-up blocker off. And as you may know, WWE.com has a lot of pop-ups. So if it requires me to turn my pop-up blocker off on WWE.com, I'm not going to look at it because it's not worth my time. But they're talking about women. So I figured, why not talk about female wrestlers or women's wrestlers? Not divas. I'm not talking about fucking WWF divas here. Because fuck the WWF divas. Ever since they started calling them divas, they've got a bunch of no-talent tramps in there who only have tits and ass. They can't wrestle. They can't put on a show. I can name 2 divas right now whose matches I've seen who could actually probably wrestle and put on a decent show. And that's Beth Phoenix and Natalya. Those are the only 2 I can name currently in WWF who can actually wrestle. Okay? Now that Divas shit all started with Stacy Keibler and Tori Wilson. Neither one could wrestle, but both would look great compared to the Divas now because they could wrestle better than they could. So I'm going to talk about women's wrestlers, not the fucking divas. And you know what? If I didn't mention your favorite diva or your favorite women's wrestlers, more than likely, they couldn't fucking wrestle. So I'm not going to fucking talk about it. Because when I watch women's wrestling, I want to see actual wrestling. They can put on a good show and make it entertaining without being tits and ass. So if I didn't mention them, more likely they couldn't wrestle. Okay? Now I'm also not going to mention valets. So Sunny is not going to get mentioned here. If I didn't mention them in this video, they couldn't wrestle, or they're a valet who wrestle occasionally, like Sonny and Terry Reynolds. They weren't full-time wrestlers, so I'm probably not going to mention them. Not saying I don't like Sonny, not saying I don't like Terry. They're both good female valets who were good on the mic and did what they were supposed to do well, but they couldn't wrestle. So we're talking about women's wrestlers. Now, of course, whenever you talk about women's wrestlers, you have to talk about Fabulous Moolah and Mae Young. Why? Because it's federal law. Yes, they're both great women's wrestlers. Fabulous Moolah held the women's title for 20 years, 20, 30 years. Something like that. I think from 50s to 80s, she held the WWF women's title. Mae Young held numerous women's titles in numerous federations, and they're both probably the greatest women's wrestlers of all times. They weren't fucking divas. And I'm not going to rant on divas again because I only have 20 minutes. But then again, you also have to mention Sensational Sherry / Scary Sherry, whatever you want to call her, who was also a phenomenal women's wrestler, who was really good and a phenomenal women's wrestler. If you haven't watched her matches, or you haven't watched Moolah or Mae Young's matches from when they were in their prime, go on YouTube and watch them. You will be entertained if you like women's wrestling. If you like tits and ass, you're not going to be entertained, so don't bother. And if you like tits and ass and the divas, get the fuck off my channel. I don't want to see you. Another one we have to mention is Alundra Blaze. WWF Women's Champion, WCW Women's Champion, went by the name Medusa. In other federations, went by Alundra Blaze in WCW, or in WWF, sorry. Sometimes my mind wanders. She was a great women's champion. She could wrestle. She could put on a good match. But she was also very beautiful and helped usher in the divas, who are more beauty than wrestling ability. Alundra Blaze was a combination of the two, and it's really, really good. She's best remembered for throwing the WWF Women's title in the trash on WCW. That's not what she should be remembered for. She should be remembered for her in-ring ability. She was a great wrestler. Look her up. Now, two of the most overlooked women's wrestlers of all time, who did not hold the WWF title or the WCW title, were, of course, Luna Vachon, or Vachon, however you pronounce her name, Luna, and Bull Nakano. Both feuded with Alundra Blaze. I think both of them feud with Sable as well. Both were phenomenal in-ring athletes. Neither one was that great to look at, but both were phenomenal in-ring athletes with diverse personalities, who were very entertaining to watch in wrestling matches, outside of wrestling matches. They were both heels. And it was very interesting to watch them. And they were probably two of the greatest modern day female wrestlers. And neither one was a diva. They were female wrestlers. And they were probably the two of the best modern day female wrestlers. Modern era, like the last video, is what we're focusing on, because that's what I know most about. So Luna Vachon and Bull Nakano, you gotta recognize those two. I know Luna's dead. She died here last year. Great tragedy. Great female wrestler. Really, we could have used her to train the modern day female wrestlers. Bull Nakano, I don't know. If she's alive, if she's dead, I'm not entirely sure. I didn't look it up. So, I'm not entirely sure. I think she's alive, and I think she trains people now. And she was actually great in ring. Now we get into the height of female wrestling in the modern era, which has to be 1997, 98, till I'd say 2003. And that's where we had a lot of guys in WWF, a lot of women in WWF, who were talented and were also very attractive. My favorite of this era is, of course, Ivory. Ivory was good in ring, and she was very attractive, she was very charismatic. She was a great female wrestler. who is underrated. She only held the female title once or twice. I think twice. And she was a great female wrestler. And really, she was phenomenal in the ring. Okay, maybe she wasn't phenomenal. Maybe I'm over-exaggerating. But she was solid in the ring. Something that, during that time, you couldn't be said about all female wrestlers. Ivory was solid in the ring. She could put on a match that other people couldn't do. She was charismatic. Very entertaining to watch. She was also incredibly attractive. That's what made her so good. We also had Jacqueline at that time. Not as attractive, but better in the ring as Ivory. She could literally probably wrestle a room to a 4-star match. She was good. She didn't get the recognition she deserved in WWF. She should have been in another federation, wrestling for other women's titles. She might not have been as famous, but she would have definitely got in-ring recognition more. And then we had other people who were crap in the ring, but they had tits and ass. And apparently that's what Vince McMahon wants in a female wrestler, is tits and ass. Hey, look, I have tits and I have an ass. Does that mean I can strut around in a bikini and win the women's title? No. But we're getting off topic here. Anyways. And then in WCW, we had, during that time, we had Medusa, who was the only female ever to win the Cruiserweight title. She also, I think, won the WCW Hardcore title once. No, that was Jacqueline. Jacqueline won the WWF Hardcore title. It was a short reign, but it was good. And then we had Medusa in WCW, who won the Cruiserweight title in what was kind of stupid. But Medusa was a good in-ring competitor. And of course, we can't talk about women without mentioning Chyna. Chyna was one of the few women's wrestlers who could actually compete with the men. She wasn't tits and ass. She was actually a competitor. She could actually wrestle and was actually a good wrestler. And she won the Intercontinental title. She was in the Royal Rumble. And she had a WWF title shot. For some reason they stuck her in the women's division. I wanted to continue to see her compete as a man. I thought the women's division was beneath her after she won the Intercontinental title. She should have had a lengthy European title reign, or a lengthy Intercontinental title reign, or a number one contendership to the world title. She wrestled men. She beat Jeff Jarrett. She beat the British Bulldog. She dominated the women's division. Not typically thought of when you think of a women's wrestler. You don't think of how many male titles did they win. Chyna won the male titles. She won the women's title, but I have a feeling that was just, we don't know where to put her. Let's give her the women's title. She shouldn't have had it. She should have just continued to compete with the men. But the WWF wanted to treat women like shit, and so they treat Chyna like shit. She's one of those I'd still pay to see wrestle, because she was a good wrestler. She was a good wrestler. They didn't let her be a great wrestler. But WWF has a history of that, so we're just going to ignore it. That's why I like Chyna. She's probably one of the best women's wrestlers. But she doesn't get the recognition she deserves because she wrestled with men a lot. Now we go to post-2000. Ooh, in the year 2000, yeah. This is when we start to get the divas. And the divas were initially started by Stacy Keibler and Tori Wilson. They couldn't wrestle. that well. I mean, they look great nowadays, but they weren't that great in the ring to begin with. And they were tits and ass. But so people, if you don't like modern divas, you could thank Tori Wilson and Stacy Keibler. They're the ones who made it like this. We did have a few good ones though. We had Molly Holly, who not great in the ring. She wasn't a phenomenal in-ring competitor, but she was good in the ring. She was good on the mic. She was good in the ring. She was attractive. They put her in a lot of crappy angles. But she was good. And she was willing to get her head shaved, something 90% of female wrestlers won't do. So Molly Holly, she was originally in WCW as Miss Madness 1999, 2000, something like that. But she was really good in WWE. They really need a woman like that to train the women now. We also had Gail Kim come in, leave, and come back since 2000. Gail Kim is one of the few female wrestlers who is phenomenal in the ring. She's not great on the mic. She's good looking, but she's not great on the mic, but she is wonderful in the ring. And we had a couple others whose names I can't quite remember. But then we went to TNA, and TNA had the women's wrestling. They had actual female wrestlers. They didn't have the divas. They had female wrestlers. And they would allow them to put on good female wrestling matches. Well, they weren't just good female wrestling matches. They were good wrestling matches. And to name all of the divas, they call them knockouts, I call them wrestlers, who came into TNA and wrestled is impossible, because I can't name them all. As I said, they did have Gail Kim. They had so many others. I mean, just about everyone on the roster in the early and mid 2000s, female-wise, was a good, solid wrestler. It was pretty much the opposite of what we were seeing from WWF, who wanted the tits and ass. Well, TNA wanted the female wrestling. TNA now is up to the tits and ass. They want the tits and ass again. And it's really a shame, because if you want to see good female wrestling, you gotta look at matches from the 50s now. So who is the greatest female wrestler in history? Probably Fabulous Moolah. Of the modern era, probably either Luna or Bull. Probably either Luna or Nakana Bull. So that's who the greatest female wrestler is. I recommend looking up some actual good female wrestling matches. Go in and watch the good ones. Don't watch the divas, and you'll see how much you're missing now with the divas.